I used to think the most painful moment of my life was getting hit by a truck in the middle of an intersection and waking up on a stretcher, on the way to emergency surgery. But it wasn't. The moment that truly shattered me was a text message from my own family while I was bleeding internally and begging for just a few hours of help with my children. That was the moment I understood that some people may share your blood, but they were never truly your family. My name is Myra Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother to 3-year-old twins, Lily and Lucas. For a long time, I believed I could survive almost anything. I had already lived through sleepless nights, impossible shifts, brutal exams, and the exhausting reality of raising 2 toddlers on my own. I thought strength was something I had mastered. I thought if I just kept moving, kept working, kept holding everything together, then nothing could really break me. I was wrong. That evening, I had just finished a 16-hour shift. I was tired, but not careless. My body ached in the ordinary way it always did after a long day at the hospital. The traffic light turned green, and I drove into the intersection like I had done 1,000 times before. I never saw the truck. 1 second. Everything was normal. The next, there was a violent crash on the driver's side. Exploding glass, twisting metal, and the sickening sensation of the world spinning out of control. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was in an ambulance. My abdomen burned with a sharp, tearing pain that made it hard to breathe. The air smelled like blood and antiseptic. Above me was a face I recognized immediately, Marcus Smith, an emergency physician from my hospital. He was speaking calmly, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. I tried to ask what had happened, and he told me I'd been in a serious accident. They suspected internal bleeding. I might need surgery immediately. The words hit me harder than the impact itself. Surgery. Internal bleeding. Emergency. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just another bad day. This wasn't something I could simply push through. My life had split into a before and an after, and I was lying right on the line between them. The first thing I thought about wasn't my pain. It wasn't the fear of surgery, or the possibility that I might not make it. The first thing I thought about was my children. Lily and Lucas were at home with the babysitter, and she was only supposed to stay until 8. Marcus checked the time and told me it was 7:15. That meant I had 45 minutes to find someone to take over before I was wheeled into surgery. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. There was blood smeared across the screen as I pulled up my parents' number. Even then, in that moment, some stubborn part of me still believed they would come. I knew they had always favored Vanessa. I knew I was never the center of their world. But this was different. I was their daughter. I was injured. I needed emergency surgery. Surely that would matter. My father answered after a few rings, and his voice already sounded irritated, as if my call had interrupted something important. I tried to speak quickly through the pain. I told him I'd been in an accident. I told him I was on my way to the hospital and likely heading into surgery. I begged him and my mother to watch Lily and Lucas for just a few hours. Just enough time for the doctors to operate and stabilize me. There was silence on the line. Then I heard muffled voices. My father must have covered the phone, because I could hear my mother speaking sharply in the background. I heard Vanessa laughing. For a second, I thought they were discussing who would come get the twins. I thought they were figuring it out. Then the call ended. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. My heart was pounding as I looked down at the screen. I was still foolishly hoping for reassurance. Instead, what I saw changed everything I thought I knew about my family. The message was from my mother. I read it once, then again, and then a third time because my mind refused to accept that she had really written those words. Myra, You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself. I stared at the screen, waiting for the sentence to somehow rearrange itself into something less cruel, less impossible. But it didn't. Every word stayed exactly where it was. Before I could even process it, another message came through. This one was from my father. He said I was a doctor. I was used to hospitals, and I shouldn't turn this into something bigger than it was. Then Vanessa added her contribution, not even words. Just a laughing emoji. That was all. No concern. No panic. No question about whether I was alive. Whether I was scared. Whether my children would be safe. Just dismissal. Just annoyance. Just mockery. I had known for years that I came second in that family. Maybe third. Maybe last. But even then, I had always clung to the belief that if something truly terrible happened, they would show up. That they might fail me emotionally, but not completely abandon me in a life or death emergency. In that ambulance, with blood pooling inside my body and terror tightening around my chest, that final illusion shattered. Marcus was watching my face carefully. I hadn't even realized he could see my screen until he asked, very gently, what they had said. But I couldn't answer. My throat closed up, and the pain in my abdomen suddenly felt secondary to the pain blooming in my chest. Something fundamental had cracked open in me. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just completely. I looked up at Marcus and whispered that I needed a phone with internet because mine was almost dead. In that moment, I understood one thing with brutal clarity. I could not rely on my family to save me. If my children were going to be safe, if my life was going to stay intact, then once again, I would have to handle everything myself. I took Marcus's phone and forced myself to think clearly. The ambulance was still moving. The pain was getting worse, and I could feel my body slipping toward shock. But I had no time to fall apart. I searched for emergency nanny services with 24-hour availability and called the first one that answered. My voice came out, clipped and professional. The same tone I used in hospital emergencies. I explained the situation, gave them my home address, my babysitter's contact information, and authorized triple payment without hesitation. Within minutes, it was arranged. Someone would arrive, take over, and make sure Lily and Lucas were safe. Strangers. Complete strangers moved faster and with more compassion than my own parents. When I handed Marcus his phone back, I asked him to screenshot the group chat messages from my dying phone before it shut off completely. At the time, I didn't fully know why I needed them. Maybe I just needed proof that this moment had really happened. Proof that I hadn't imagined the cruelty. Proof that the line had finally been crossed in a way that could never be uncrossed. The surgery lasted 4 hours. My spleen had ruptured, and the internal bleeding was severe. Later, the doctors told me that if I'd arrived even a little later, I might not have survived. I spent 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of pain medication, waking to nurses checking my vitals and the cold brightness of hospital lights. During those 5 days, my parents never called. They never texted. They never showed up. The emergency nanny service kept me updated with photos of Lily and Lucas. They looked clean. Fed. Calm. Safe. Every image filled me with gratitude and heartbreak at the same time. The people taking care of my children cared more about my emergency than the people who had raised me. On the 3rd day, I asked for my laptop. I logged into my banking app and stared at 8 years of automatic transfers, mortgage payments, insurance premiums, emergency help, one after another like clockwork. Then I canceled every single one of them. After that, I blocked my mother, my father, and Vanessa. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. It felt like setting down a weight I had carried for so long. I had forgotten it wasn't mine. Lying in that hospital bed gave me too much time to think. And I realized this story hadn't started with the accident. It had started years earlier. In the Carver household where I grew up. In that house, love was never something freely given. It had a ranking system. And I always knew exactly where I stood. My older sister, Vanessa, was 3 years ahead of me and seemed born to be adored. She was effortlessly beautiful, charming in a way that made people lean toward her without even knowing why. And my parents lit up every time she entered a room. When Vanessa announced she wanted to become a fashion designer, my mother cried, proud tears. My father called her our little visionary. When I said I wanted to become a doctor, he nodded once and said, "That's practical." That was it. Practical. So I learned early that if I wanted to matter, I would have to earn it. I buried myself in textbooks, chased perfect grades, fought my way into top schools, and kept telling myself that one day, if I succeeded enough, they would look at me the way they looked at Vanessa. But the more capable I became, the more my family used my strength as an excuse not to care for me. I became the reliable one, the one who never needed much, the one who would manage. That label sounds flattering until you live inside it long enough to understand what it really means. It means your pain gets overlooked. Your needs get postponed. Your sacrifices become invisible because everyone assumes you can handle more. That was the role I had been raised into, not daughter. Not equal. But support system. Vanessa was celebrated. I was expected. Vanessa was cherished. I was useful. If you've ever been treated like you had to stay strong forever just because you always managed to survive, comment in. Some wounds don't bleed where anyone can see them, but they still shape your whole life. Mine started inside my own family. For years, I told myself I wasn't jealous of Vanessa. I tried to be fair. I told myself that her world was more fragile than mine, that fashion was a harsher industry, that she needed more encouragement because her path was riskier. I used logic to excuse emotional neglect. It was easier than admitting I was hurting. But the imbalance in our family wasn't subtle. It followed us everywhere. Vanessa only had to mention a new idea, a new collection, a new dream. And my parents would gather around her like she was unveiling something magical. Every small success of hers was treated like a milestone. Every setback became a family emergency. Meanwhile, I worked harder than I knew how to describe and received little more than polite approval. At family dinners, the conversation always circled back to Vanessa, her latest show, her investor meetings, her dating life, her next city. If I brought up a difficult patient case, a brutal exam, or a major achievement at the hospital, the response was usually a short nod before someone steered things back to her. Over time, I stopped offering pieces of myself. I became quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. The most painful part wasn't that my parents loved Vanessa. It was that they never seemed to realize how much I needed love too. They treated my discipline like proof that I was fine. They treated my silence like proof that I didn't need comfort. They treated my survival like proof that I was never hurting. But strong children are often just the ones who learned no one was coming. I didn't understand that then. I thought maturity meant self-sufficiency. I thought being independent meant I should need less from the people who loved me. It took me a long time to realize there's a difference between being strong and being neglected. A child can grow up in a house with no screaming, no violence, and still spend a lifetime starving for tenderness. That was me. I wasn't unloved in obvious ways. I was simply never chosen. And after enough years of not being chosen, you start forgetting you were ever supposed to be. The day I graduated from medical school should have been one of the proudest days of my life. I had fought for that moment with everything. I had years of sacrifice, relentless studying, exhaustion layered over exhaustion, and the constant pressure of proving I deserved to be there. I stood in my cap and gown surrounded by classmates and their families. Bouquets everywhere. Laughter. Tears. Cameras flashing. Everyone seemed wrapped in celebration. I kept looking for my parents. When they finally arrived, they were 2 hours late. The ceremony was basically over. My mother apologized without looking me directly in the eye and said Vanessa had an emergency meeting with a potential investor, so they had needed to take her first. I remember standing there in my gown, holding all the pride I had worked so hard to build, and feeling it collapse inward. There were no flowers, no dinner reservation, no lingering hugs or excited voices, just a rushed apology and a quick photo in the parking lot before they had to leave again because Vanessa needed emotional support after her meeting. That parking lot picture still exists somewhere. In it, I'm smiling. If you didn't know the story behind it, you might think I was happy. Maybe in some shallow way I was. I had still become a doctor. No one could take that from me. But beneath the smile was a familiar ache, the quiet, humiliating realization that even on the biggest day of my life, I was still an afterthought. A few years earlier, when Vanessa had her first fashion show in New York, the entire family flew out. They stayed in a 5-star hotel. They dressed up. They sat in the front row. My father posted photo after photo online, calling her talented. Our way. Extraordinary. For me, there was a parking lot snapshot and a lukewarm congrats. Honey, at the time, I still told myself it was fine, that maybe they just didn't know how to celebrate someone like me. But that wasn't true. They knew exactly how to celebrate. They simply reserved that kind of love for Vanessa. I got whatever was left over. The difference in how my parents treated Vanessa and me wasn't hidden. It wasn't subtle. It happened so often, in so many forms, that eventually it became the air we all breathed. The only reason it lasted as long as it did was because I kept explaining it away. I remember Vanessa's first fashion show in New York vividly. My parents treated it like a royal event. Flights were booked immediately. Hotel suites were reserved. Everyone spoke about the trip like the family was witnessing history. My mother agonized over what dress to wear. My father rehearsed which photos he wanted to post online. There was excitement in the house I had almost never seen for anything involving me. I went too. Of course. I clapped. I smiled. I played my role. Vanessa walked the room afterward like she belonged to the spotlight. And in truth, she did. But what stayed with me wasn't her success. It was the way my parents looked at her. Their faces glowed with pride. They talked about her future as if it were something dazzling and rare. They made her feel like the center of a story worth telling. Then I compared that with my own milestones. The years of study. The sleepless nights. The white coat. The medical degree. The residency match. Each one had been met with approval. Yes, but never wonder. Never celebration. Never that open, overflowing pride. I didn't need luxury hotels or social media tributes. I didn't need grand gestures. I just wanted to feel, at least once, like my life mattered to them in a way that stirred joy. Not just practicality. Instead, I became the one who was expected to endure quietly. Vanessa's dreams were protected. Mine were managed. Looking back, I can see how dangerous that dynamic was. When one child is treated like the star and the other like the dependable background support, it doesn't just wound the ignored child. It warps the entire family. It teaches everyone the wrong lessons: who is worth investing in, who is allowed to need, who exists to give. For too long, I accepted my place in that arrangement. I thought being needed was enough. I didn't yet understand that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. 8 years earlier, right after I finished medical school, my father called me one evening, sounding tense and embarrassed. He said they were in a bind. The mortgage payment was due. Money was tight. And could I help just this once? I wired them $2. 400 that same night. They were my parents. Helping them felt natural, automatic, unquestionable, but just this once became every month. First, it was the mortgage. Then it was their health insurance when my father's company stopped covering them. Then the emergencies started rolling in car repairs. A leaking roof. A broken furnace. Overdue bills. All the little crises that somehow always found their way to me. Every request came wrapped in the language of temporary hardship. But the pattern never stopped. I never said no. Not once. By then, I was already living a life that demanded everything from me. Long hospital hours. Brutal rotations. Endless studying. Very little sleep. But somehow, I also became the quiet financial foundation under my parents' lives. My money kept their home stable. My money kept them insured. My money solved the problems they never learned to solve on their own. I didn't ask for gratitude. I didn't keep score in any emotional sense. At least not at first. I told myself this was what good daughters did. Family helps family. Family shows up. Family sacrifices. Those beliefs were stitched so deeply into me that I didn't stop to ask whether the sacrifices were mutual, whether the respect flowed both ways, or whether anyone would have done the same for me. They wouldn't have. I know that now. Because what I was offering wasn't support anymore. It had become dependency. Worse. It had become entitlement. They no longer saw my help as generosity. They saw it as the natural order of things. I was the one who would fix it. The one who would absorb the burden. The one whose own needs could always wait. And the cruel irony was that the more I cared for them, the less they seemed to see me as a daughter at all. I had become a resource, a solution, a convenience, useful, reliable, and entirely taken for granted. When I was pregnant with Lily and Lucas, their father left during my 5th month. I still remember the shock of that abandonment. How quickly fear moved into every corner of my life. I was finishing my training, dealing with a high-risk twin pregnancy, and trying not to collapse under the reality that I would likely be doing all of it alone. Then came a frightening bleeding episode that sent me to the hospital. I was lying there terrified, one hand over my stomach, trying to hold on to the belief that the babies were okay and that I was okay too. I called my parents because I needed comfort more than anything. Not money. Not advice. Just presence. Just the reassurance that in a moment like that, I would not be left alone. But my mother said they couldn't come. Vanessa was stressed after her show in Milan, and she really needed them right then. That sentence changed something in me, even if I didn't fully admit it at the time. They didn't come for the birth either. They didn't come during that first brutal month when I was barely sleeping, nursing 2 newborns, crying in exhaustion, and studying for my board exams in whatever scraps of time I could find. Still, the automatic transfers continued every month. Mortgage, insurance, extras. I was healing from childbirth and raising infants alone, while still financially supporting the very people who never showed up for me. That was when I started keeping records more carefully. Maybe part of me already knew I would need to see the truth in numbers someday. Maybe part of me needed proof that what I felt wasn't selfishness or exaggeration. It was reality. When I totaled everything, the number was over $360. Ling ling ling. And somehow, after all of that, the people living partly off my labor and sacrifice were still willing to call me a burden. If this story is reaching you, Hit like, sometimes the smallest gesture helps a story find the exact person who needs to hear it most. And I know there are people out there carrying family pain in silence. I don't know exactly why I began tracking every payment so carefully. At first, it may have just been habit. Medicine trains you to document everything, to rely on evidence, to notice patterns before they become emergencies. But deep down, I think I needed something more than memory. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the imbalance, proof that I wasn't being dramatic, proof that the exhaustion I felt wasn't weakness. It was the weight of real, measurable sacrifice. So I made a spreadsheet. Date, description, amount, mortgage, insurance premiums, car repair, roof leak, cash transfer, emergency help, over and over again. At first, each line looked manageable on its own, but when years of those lines stacked together, the spreadsheet stopped looking like generosity and started looking like a financial bloodstream flowing steadily out of me and into them. Every month, Armayen, $400 for the mortgage. Every month, $800 for insurance. Then all the temporary extra expenses that somehow never stopped arriving. I never asked them to sign anything. I never treated it like debt. I gave freely. And because I gave freely, they came to treat my support as inevitable. It was no longer kindness in their eyes. It was access. When I finally added it all up, I was stunned. More than $364. Ling ling ling. Enough money to change a life. Enough to build real security for my children. Enough to ease my own stress in ways I never allowed myself to consider. Instead, that money had gone into maintaining the comfort of people who still found it easy to dismiss me. The numbers also exposed something else. I had funded the very image of family stability they presented to the world. My parents got to appear self-sufficient, respectably, and generous, because I was silently subsidizing their lives. Vanessa got to float more easily through her world because I was absorbing the pressure underneath ours. I had been carrying them all while being cast, publicly and privately, as distant, difficult, or cold. The cruelty of that realization wasn't just financial, it was moral. I had paid for their peace while they chipped away at mine. And by the time the ambulance text happened, I no longer had any room left for denial. After surgery, I woke up feeling like my body had become something foreign stitched. Swollen, heavy, and painfully fragile. My abdomen throbbed under layers of bandages. My throat was raw. The hospital lights were bright in that sterile, unforgiving way I knew too well from working there myself. I had spent years standing at patients' bedsides, offering calm reassurance, explaining procedures, promising they were in good hands. But lying there as the patient, I discovered how lonely recovery can feel when the people who should love you most are nowhere to be found. The emergency nanny service sent me daily updates about Lily and Lucas. Photos of them eating dinner, coloring at the table, getting ready for bed. They looked safe. They looked cared for. Every image filled me with relief and a strange grief at the same time. Strangers had stepped in with more speed, more responsibility, and more compassion than my own family could summon in a medical crisis. I kept waiting for my phone to light up with a message from my parents. Even a bad one. Even something defensive or awkward. Anything that would prove they understood the seriousness of what had happened. But nothing came. Not once. Not from my mother. Not from my father. Not even from Vanessa. Their silence was louder than any insult. It told me all I needed to know. My pain had not interrupted their lives enough to matter. On the third day, I asked the nurse for my laptop. She looked surprised and asked if I was sure, because I should be resting. But there are moments when action is a form of healing. And I knew this was one of them. I opened my banking app and stared at 8 years of transfers lined up like evidence. Mortgage. Insurance. Extra support. Again and again. Then I canceled every automatic payment. After that, I blocked my father's number, my mother's, and Vanessa's. There were no dramatic tears, no long internal debate, just stillness. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to save a structure that was built on your self-abandonment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cruel. I felt clear. What surprised me most after I cut off the money and blocked my family wasn't fear, it was silence. A deep, unfamiliar silence that felt almost sacred. For years, part of my mind had always been braced for the next request, the next emergency, the next call that would begin with embarrassment and end with obligation. I had been living with a low, constant pressure I no longer even noticed because it had become normal. Once it was gone, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by anticipation. Lying in that hospital bed, I finally saw the pattern for what it was. I wasn't simply helping my parents. I had become the mechanism through which they avoided consequences. My money protected them from reality. My reliability allowed them to stay dependent while still feeling entitled. And every time I stepped in, I taught them that I would always keep doing it. So when I ended the transfers, I wasn't just making a financial decision. I was stepping out of a role they had assigned me years ago, the fixer. The dependable daughter. The one who absorbs the weight so everyone else can stay comfortable. I knew there would be fallout. I knew they would notice quickly. I knew accusations, guilt, and outrage would follow. But strangely, that knowledge didn't shake me the way it once would have. Marcus came by every day while I was recovering. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he sat quietly and asked how I was feeling. He never pushed for answers I didn't want to give. He never played rescuer. His presence was gentle, grounded, and real. When he asked me one afternoon how I was doing, I told him the truth for the first time in years. I said I actually felt better, not because I'd been hit by a truck, not because surgery was pleasant, but because for once I had stopped carrying people who had no intention of carrying me back. I still didn't know exactly what would happen next. My parents were not the kind of people who accepted losing access quietly. They would rage. They would rewrite the story. They would probably try to paint me as unstable or ungrateful. But after facing the possibility of dying on an operating table, a lot of other fears lost their power. I wasn't afraid of disappointing them anymore. I was finally afraid of disappearing inside them again. 2 weeks after I got home from the hospital, I was making pancakes for Lily and Lucas on a Saturday morning. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup. And for the first time in a while, the ordinary sweetness of life felt almost unreal. The twins were laughing, stacking blocks, knocking them over, arguing in the way only toddlers can. I was still moving slowly because of the incision. Still sore. Still healing. But I was grateful to be upright in my own kitchen. Then there was a knock at the door. 3 firm knocks. My whole body tightened instantly. My first thought was that my parents had found their way to me. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. I looked through the peephole and froze. Standing there was my grandfather. Thomas, silver hair neatly combed. Sharp blue eyes. Posture still carrying the authority of the federal judge he had been for 40 years. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years. The moment I opened the door, he pulled me into a hug so tight that it tugged painfully at my healing abdomen. I didn't care. I held on. When he pulled back, he looked at me carefully. The way someone looks when they already know far more than you've said. Then he told me quietly that he knew everything. Eleanor had called him. I started to explain, instinctively falling into the old habit of defending myself before anyone could accuse me of overreacting. But he raised his hand and stopped me. I didn't need to explain. Not to him. He reached into his jacket and handed me an elegant, cream-colored envelope. It was an invitation to his 70th birthday party the following Saturday. The whole family would be there, he said. Then he looked directly into my eyes and added that there were things that needed to be said. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a summons to truth. I invited him inside. Lily and Lucas took to him instantly, climbing into his lap, showing him toys, demanding attention with the fearless confidence children have when they sense safety. Watching him with them undid something in me. It reminded me that family could feel warm. Family could feel steady. Family could actually show up. My grandfather sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee in his hands, while Lily and Lucas played nearby. There was something deeply grounding about his presence, calm, measured, impossible to manipulate. He asked me if I still had records of all the money I had sent my parents over the years. I told him I did. Not just some of it, all of it. Bank statements, confirmations, a spreadsheet with dates and totals. When I said that, he simply nodded and said, "Good." Then he told me what he intended to do, at his birthday party, in front of the entire family. He was going to bring the truth into the open. Not as revenge. Not as a theatrical humiliation. As fact. He said that in all his years on the bench, he had learned one thing with certainty. Facts have their own authority when people are finally forced to face them. My parents had built a comfortable lie around my silence. They had relied on the image of themselves as respectable, generous people while quietly living off my labor. He was done letting that stand. I asked him whether everyone would hate me if the truth came out. The fear was still there. Old and familiar. Even after everything. Part of me still worried that honesty would cost me whatever was left of my family. He reached across the table, took my hand, and told me that the people who mattered would not hate me for telling the truth. And the ones who did were never worthy of my sacrifice in the first place. I nearly cried when he said that. In the days that followed, I gathered everything. Every transfer. Every payment. Every confirmation. I printed the records and arranged them in chronological order. Mortgage. Insurance. Car repairs. Home. Maintenance. Support for Vanessa. 8 years of quiet bleeding turned into paper evidence. Eleanor came by to help me sort everything. And the look on her face darkened with every page she turned. She said the total was life-changing money. She was right. What shook me most wasn't just the amount. It was the realization that I was finally preparing to stop hiding inside their version of me. For the first time, I wasn't going to be the quiet one. I wasn't going to absorb it and say nothing. I was going to let the truth stand in the room with all of us. 3 days before the party, Eleanor came over and helped me organize the last of the records. She had always been the one relative who refused to pretend everything was fine. As she flipped through the folder, page after page, her expression hardened. When she said the full amount out loud, more than $364. 000. My kitchen seemed to go still. Hearing the total spoken into the air made it real in a way numbers on a screen never had. I told her I didn't want to destroy the family. I just wanted them to finally see what I had done. What I had carried. What they had taken from me. Eleanor put her hand on my shoulder and told me something I needed to hear. I wasn't destroying anything. I was just stopping the lie. My parents had built their comfortable life on my silence. I was no longer obligated to keep donating that silence to them. That same evening, I got a text from a cousin I barely spoke to. He said he'd heard there had been some kind of falling out between me and my parents, and that Vanessa had been telling people I'd been acting erratic since the accident. Unstable. Confused. Emotionally off. I stared at the message. And honestly, I wasn't shocked. That was exactly how my family operated when the truth threatened them. They got ahead of it. They shaped the narrative first. They planted just enough doubt that when I finally spoke, people might hesitate to believe me. They were preparing the room before I even walked into it. That hurt. But it also clarified everything. People only work that hard to rewrite the story when they know the facts won't favor them. My parents and Vanessa already understood, on some level, that what they had done was indefensible. So they were doing the only thing they knew how to do, turning me into the problem. But this time, I had records. I had screenshots. I had witnesses. Most of all, I had reached the point where being misunderstood no longer scared me as much as staying silent did. That night, I placed the folder by the door. I knew the coming weekend would change my life. The only question left was, how completely? My grandfather's house looked exactly the way old family power always imagines itself: white columns, broad porches, manicured grounds, and the kind of quiet wealth that never needs to announce itself. As I drove into the circular driveway, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. More than 40 cars were already parked there. The whole family had come. Lily and Lucas chattered excitedly in the back seat about the big house and the balloons visible through the windows. I, on the other hand, felt like I was walking toward a controlled explosion. I wore a simple navy dress. Professional. Quiet. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to let the truth breathe. Inside, the party was already in full swing. Waiters moved through the room with champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Crystal glasses glinted under the chandelier. And then I saw them, my parents, standing near the fireplace. Dressed elegantly. Looking exactly like the respectable, polished people they wanted the family to believe they were. My mother's smile disappeared the second she saw me. My father's face went rigid. Vanessa reached me first. She floated over in a designer dress and gave me that perfect social smile she had spent her whole life mastering. She air-kissed my cheek and asked whether the accident had really been that serious. I looked at her and told her plainly that I had suffered a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. I had almost died. Her expression flickered, and she said Mom had told her it was just a fender bender. Mom wasn't there, I said. That one sentence cracked the polished surface between us. For a moment, I saw the panic underneath her composure. Then it disappeared again, replaced by false sympathy. She told me I looked fine now, as though survival erased everything that had happened. I shifted Lucas on my hip, held Lily's hand tighter, and walked deeper into the room. Nothing had exploded yet. No one was shouting. But the pressure was already building. The whole evening felt like standing inside a storm that hadn't broken yet. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that once it did, there would be no going back. About half an hour into the party, I was pouring fruit punch for Lily and Lucas when I heard Vanessa's voice rise just enough to carry across the room. She was standing near the dessert table with a cluster of aunts and cousins, wearing concern like a carefully chosen accessory. She said she was truly worried about me, that the accident had really affected me, that I had been saying strange things and cutting off contact with our parents for no reason. My mother, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, added that they had tried everything to reach me and were terrified I was having some sort of breakdown. I kept my back turned, but each word landed like a blade. This was their strategy. Get there first. Shape the story. Make me look unstable before I could tell the truth. I could feel people watching me with that awful mix of pity and suspicion. Eleanor appeared beside me and muttered that they had been planting these seeds all week. They knew something was coming, and they were trying to discredit me before I ever opened my mouth. I looked across the room and saw my grandfather watching the scene unfold with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but then he gave me the smallest nod. It was enough. A moment later, someone clinked a glass, and the room quieted. My grandfather stood up, even at 70. He commanded silence the way some people command weather. He said that before the festivities continued. He had a few things to say. The air shifted instantly. Everyone felt it before he could go on. My father stepped forward and tried to take control. He told the family that, as many of them may have heard, I had been going through a difficult time since the accident. He painted me as confused, distant, irrational. My mother stood beside him, trembling in all the right places. Vanessa chimed in from across the room, claiming I was spreading terrible lies. I stood there holding my child, feeling 40 eyes on me. But I no longer felt helpless. Then my grandfather looked at my father and asked, in a calm voice, sharper than any shout, "Are you finished, Richard?" The room went still. That was the moment everything turned. My grandfather walked into the center of the room with the measured control of a man who had spent decades ruling courtrooms. He listened to my parents' performance without interruption, then began asking questions. Simple questions. Devastating questions. The first one drained the color from my father's face immediately, who had been paying the mortgage on their house for the past 8 years. My father stumbled. My mother started to stammer. And then my grandfather pulled out the folder, the one I had prepared, and said he had complete records showing monthly transfers from my account to their mortgage company for 96 consecutive months. A murmur rippled through the room. My parents tried to call it a misunderstanding. But facts are hard to outrun once they're spoken clearly. Then he read the numbers. More than $230. 0 inches mortgage payments. More than $76. 0 inches health insurance premiums. Tens of thousands more in repairs, emergency expenses, and support. Even financial help for Vanessa's fashion ventures. Total over 364. Ling, ling, ling. I watched my family's expressions shift in real time, from disbelief to discomfort. From discomfort to shame. From shame to horror. But the final blow came when my grandfather took out his phone and read my mother's text message from the night of the accident. Word for word. He told the room that I had been bleeding internally, on my way to emergency surgery, trying to find someone to watch my children. Then he read, "You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself." The room erupted. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. A few relatives physically stepped away from my parents. My mother broke down. My father shouted that they hadn't known it was that serious. Eleanor snapped back, asking whether they had even bothered to ask. Then my grandfather turned to me and asked whether I wanted to say anything. I stepped forward and said I hadn't come for revenge. I came because I could no longer keep buying love that should have been free. I said I was done sending money. I said I needed real distance, not temporary guilt and forced reconciliation. I didn't say it in anger. I said it in truth. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I chose myself without apology. After that night, my parents left the party early. No one stopped them. No one rushed after them. The silence they left behind didn't feel cold. It felt like the stillness after a violent storm. When the damage is visible but the air is finally honest. In the days that followed, my phone filled with messages from relatives, cousins, aunts, and uncles apologized for believing the version of me they had been fed for years. People started re-examining everything: my supposed distance, Vanessa's constant spotlight, the way my parents had always framed our family. Then the practical consequences began. Without my money, my parents could no longer afford the house. A few months later, they put it on the market and moved temporarily into my Uncle Frank's guest house. My father got a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother started doing bookkeeping for a local church. For the first time in years, they had to live inside the reality they had spent so long avoiding. No invisible safety net. No quiet rescue. No daughter funding a life they treated as their own achievement. Vanessa's fall came too. Word about the party spread. One damaged reputation led to a lost contract. And eventually, she was waitressing part-time just to stay afloat. 6 months later, she called me. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. She apologized, not polished, not theatrical, but broken open. She admitted she had enjoyed being the favorite so much that she never wanted to look too closely at what that favoritism was costing me. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I told her to start by standing on her own feet. As for me, I redirected the $200 I used to send my parents every month into a college fund for Lily and Lucas. A year after the accident, I stood in my new apartment, small, simple, close to the hospital, in a good school district, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Real peace. I finally understood that love is not something you earn by being useful. It comes from the people who stay when you are weak. And from that point on, I stopped calling self-respect selfishness. I called it freedom. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you. And if this story reminded you that setting boundaries is not betrayal but survival, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next stories. You never know when one story might become the exact thing you needed to hear at the hardest moment of your life.